This is Balance of Power on Bloomberg Television and Radio. I'm David Weston. Today is the 47th annual March for Life in Washington. It's a pro-life event that's timed for the anniversary of Roe against Wade, and it attracts anti-abortion advocates from around the country. No U.S. president has ever appeared at this rally, that is, until today, with President Trump scheduled to speak there momentarily. We go now to Washington to our political panel of Rachel Bovard. She is Senior Director of Policy at the Conservative Partnership Institute, and John Zogby, founder and senior partner of John Zogby Strategy. So welcome, both of you. So let me talk about social issues in this election, because thus far we've been sort of focused on the Democrats. The Democrats don't seem to be disagreeing with each other on things like abortion. At the same time, does President Trump really need to shore this up? Rachel, I'll ask you that. Doesn't he have that pretty solid with his base?
He does, but I think this is an incredibly important moment for him because, evangelicals, conservative Catholics, the religious community took a gamble on him, particularly on this social conservative issue on pro-life. And he is now the first president ever to go to the March for Life. I really think shoring up a lot of the accomplishments that he's gotten for this community. He has been above and away the most pro-life president that we've had. Things like getting Planned Parenthood to defund themselves, putting restrictions, allowing states to restrict Medicaid funding to abortion providers, reinstituting guidance saying that babies born alive after an abortion get care. All these things have been on the agenda for social conservatives, and he's locked them down in addition to appointing a host of conservative jurists. And so I think, this is an important constituency for him, and they're extremely excited to see him today. So,
John Zogby, from the Democrat side, what about the constituency in Wisconsin, in Michigan, in Pennsylvania, that people think will really be a critical state? To what extent will the votes there, the critical votes the president needs, be driven by things such as abortion?
To a large degree, they will. The question we always ask in these battleground states is, among blue-collar voters, swing voters in particular, they're going to vote on the economy or are they going to vote on values? They tend to be a bit more conservative on values. This president is making a clear and unequivocal statement about where he stands. And from his vantage point politically, what he's doing is he is solidifying that base, perhaps more than any other president has, by coming out today. He runs the risk, however, of shoring up the Democratic base on the opposite end by taking such a strong stand. And that in itself makes abortion and some of these other gay rights and some of these other conservative issues the ultimate wedge issue. And now where do swing voters in Wisconsin, Michigan land? Right. That's that's where the other issues come in.
Rachel, as you see the politics of it, is there any risk at all of the president going too far on this issue? And let me talk specifically about suburban women. There's been some reporting, including in some recent elections, that maybe even in some red state, there's been some defection from suburban women on some of the social values issues. Is there any danger that he actually could alienate some of the people he needs?
Well, I think when you look at what the polling shows, most Americans actually support restrictions on late-term abortions. And I think, President Trump has really responded to, I think, the increasing extremism of Democrats on this issue. I mean, you had a governor of a state say that it was okay for a baby born after a botched abortion to not receive medical care. That's extreme. That's infanticide. And that has galvanized. I don't think the left realizes how that has galvanized social conservatives on this issue. And so, I think a lot of what he's proposing is pretty simple. A lot of it has been religious freedom, conscience protections, simply saying, late-term abortions aren't going to happen, and allowing people to make choices. And so when you look at his agenda on this issue, it hasn't been that extreme. And I think it's in line with a lot of the polling, which shows across the country, people are more or less in the middle. They support restrictions on late-term abortions after 3 months. And that's a lot of what President Trump has been focused on.
So John, pick up on that, what Rachel just said about people tend to be somewhere in the middle, that they don't want anybody to have an abortion whenever they want. On the other hand, they are in favor of some restrictions on it. Is there anybody on the Democratic side running for president, any of the candidates, who may triangulate a little bit here and say, look, I am for abortion, but I'm against some of the extreme things, actually, that Rachel just talked about?
There is not one candidate out there who takes that position at all. And so this is the ultimate wedge issue here, and this is why we're talking about it today. Because for every solid Republican and conservative that the president brings into his corner, he is also alienating a possible swing or soft liberal supporter. Remember, we're at about 50% now of all voters who say that they will never vote for Donald Trump. Democrats' problem is that they need to be sure that these folks come out and vote for whoever the Democratic nominee is. And an issue like this, taking such a strong and actually one-sided view on abortion, could actually help bring some of those voters out.
Rachel Bovard,
well, can I just add?
Sorry, please.
Yes,
please.
Can I just add, to the point that no Democrat takes the position of infanticide, increasingly the progressive base has pushed them to take that position. Just last year, there was a vote in the Senate on the Born Alive Abortion Survivors Protection Act, which simply said if a baby's born alive after a botched abortion, they deserve medical care. All 44 Senate Democrats voted against that. So they are now on record not supporting care for an aborted infant that manages to survive. So I do think increasingly the progressive base is pulling the Democratic Party to the left on this issue, and Trump and I think a lot of Republicans are responding to it.
We're talking with Rachel Bovard and John Zogby, our political panel here. So, Rachel, I want to come back on what President Trump has done on this issue, and I think that many Republicans say one of the things he's done is Supreme Court nominations, putting people on the Supreme Court. We have a big abortion case up there in the court. They're in the middle of the term right now. Could this entire landscape change depending on how that comes out? We did, after all, have a lot of Republicans assume that when it came to Obamacare, the court would go a certain way, and we had Chief Justice Roberts go the other way. Could it change between now and November?
Yeah, one thing I've learned, you don't ever want to predict the Supreme Court. It can go either way. But this abortion case is important. It's not as big of a sea change, I think, as everyone's making it out to be. It's just about whether or not doctors should have admitting privileges. Abortion doctors should have admitting privileges at local hospitals. But it is going to be a seminal case because the Supreme Court doesn't often take these cases. But I do think, going back to this base for President Trump, this is why a lot of evangelicals, conservative Catholics came to the polls for him, is because they knew he would put conservative justices in place on the Supreme Court, because more and more frequently, because Congress fails to do its job, these policy issues are being litigated in the courts. And so those appointments matter more than they ever have before. And Trump has delivered on all these issues for his base.
John Zogby, let's spend a minute or two at least here on impeachment. There's an impeachment trial going on, after all, up on the Capitol Hill. A pretty historic event, although a lot of people are not paying too much attention to it. Is there any prospect at this point that, in fact, they'll get those 4 Republican senators to vote to call witnesses?
No, they're trying awfully hard to do it, but no. There is really no chance. In particular, you had some very strong statements by Jerry Nadler and Adam Schiff that were deemed by some of these specific moderate Republicans to be insulting. That's not the way to win friends and influence people. I mean, bottom line here, Democrats are trying very hard to make a point. That point has been made over and over and over and over again. This issue is, president's not going to be removed from office, even though the polls float back and forth, 48% removed, 51% removed. The thing is, you're not going to remove a president of the United States who's got support in the mid-40 percentile. Remember, to get Nixon out of office all those years ago, his numbers went down to 23%, and it became a political liability. President is not viewed as a political liability by these Republicans yet.
Rachel Bovard, final thought. Come November, is this impeachment, however it comes out, and we think we know it's going to come out, is it going to factor at all in the election?
I think Democrats desperately want it to, but I don't think it's going to come out that way. I think people have made up their minds already. They are where they are. This impeachment trial isn't changing their minds. And in fact, it's turning a lot of independents off. So at the end of the day, he's going to be acquitted. I don't think it's going to weigh too strongly in the final outcome in 2020.
Okay, it looks like it's going to happen reasonably quickly. Okay, many thanks to our political panel now of Rachel Bovard and John Zogby. And you can watch and listen to the president's speech at the March for Life on the Bloomberg using the function Live Go.